The morning sunlight spilled softly through the kitchen window, painting golden streaks across the tiled floor. Emily Carter stood by the sink, her hands resting on the edge of the counter, watching the world outside through the glass. The wind stirred the maple leaves in her backyard, whispering secrets of changed secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Her house was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that pressed against her chest, reminding her of what used to fill the space: laughter, music, late-night conversations about dreams and plans that now seemed to belong to another life. It had been 6 years since she and Michael married, and in the beginning, every corner of their home had felt alive with warmth. They had painted the walls themselves, arguing playfully about colors, cooking their first meals together in this very kitchen. She could still remember the way he'd laughed when she'd burned the toast on their first morning as husband and wife. But lately, the laughter had faded into polite words and distant smiles. Michael had grown busier with work-late meetings, phone calls during dinner, missed weekends that turned into quiet apologies. Emily never complained. She knew he worked hard for them. Yet in the stillness of the house, when his voice was gone and only the ticking clock kept her company, she often wondered if something inside him had quietly changed. She glanced at the small, framed photograph on the counter, a picture from their anniversary 2 years ago. They stood by the lake, the sunset behind them, his arm around her shoulders. She looked at it now and realized how different they both seemed. In that picture, her eyes sparkled with certainty. Now, they carried a question she hadn't dared to ask aloud. Was she still seen? Still needed? Still loved? The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. The sound echoed through the quiet house, unexpected and sharp. Emily wiped her hands and walked to the door, heart beating a little faster than usual. When she opened it, she was surprised to see Daniel, Michael's best friend, standing there. He looked out of place, his dark hair was damp from the light drizzle outside, and his expression carried something heavy, something uncertain. "Daniel," she said softly, "this is a surprise." "Hey, Emily," he greeted, managing a tired smile. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I was driving by and I thought I'd stop in for a minute." She hesitated, then smiled politely. "Of course. Come in." As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of rain clung to his jacket. Emily guided him to the living room, where the soft hum of the heater filled the space. She poured 2 cups of tea, the warmth of the steam curling between them like a quiet bridge. Daniel had always been kind, loyal to Michael, and easy to talk to. But today there was something different in his eyes, something thoughtful and troubled. "Michael's not home, I'm afraid," Emily said gently, placing his tea on the table. "He's in Toronto for a few days." Daniel nodded slowly, looking down at his cup. "Yeah, I know. He mentioned the trip." There was a pause. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the window like 1,000 small heartbeats. "Daniel," Emily began softly, "is everything all right?" He lifted his gaze to hers, and for a moment she saw conflict there, a storm behind calm eyes. "I don't really know how to say this," he admitted, "but I needed to talk to you. Not as Michael's friend, but as someone who cares about both of you." Her breath caught slightly. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't wound. "I think there's something you should know. Something I saw that didn't feel right." Emily felt a chill trace the back of her neck. She tried to steady her voice. "What are you talking about?" Daniel looked down, his fingers tightening around his cup. "I shouldn't have said anything. Maybe it's not my place. But Michael's been distracted lately. He's been staying late at the office, talking less. I didn't want to believe the things I've been hearing." The silence between them deepened. Emily's heart thudded softly, each beat a whisper of fear and disbelief. "Hearing," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's expression softened. "I just thought you deserved the truth, whatever it is. You've always been honest, Emily. You've always seen the best in people. I just didn't want you to be blindsided." Emily turned her eyes toward the rain outside. The drops streaked down the glass, blurring the world beyond it. "Thank you," she said after a long pause. for caring enough to tell me." Daniel's gaze lingered on her, steady, kind, but filled with quiet sorrow. "I know this isn't easy. I just thought you should know what people are saying before it turns into something worse." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her cup down. "People can say many things, Daniel, but I'll need to see it with my own eyes before I believe anything." He nodded slowly. "That's fair. Just be careful, all right?" She gave a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I always am." After Daniel left, Emily stood by the window for a long time watching his car disappear down the road. The rain softened again, and in the reflection of the glass, she saw herself a woman holding her breath between truth and denial. Something inside her whispered that life was about to change. Not with thunder or sudden heartbreak, but with quiet, undeniable truth, one that she would soon have to face, no matter how much it hurt. She pressed her hand to her heart and whispered to herself, "I need to know. I need to see it for myself." Outside, the storm faded, but inside her chest, it had only just begun. The next morning, the house was filled with soft sunlight, but Emily felt the weight of yesterday pressing gently on her heart. She sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at nothing in particular. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel, the concern in his voice, the sadness in his eyes, the way he seemed to carry something heavier than his words. It wasn't the first time Daniel had come to her with honesty. Over the years, he had quietly been there in moments when Michael had not. Not in a way that crossed lines, never that, but in small gestures that reminded her that kindness still existed in a world that sometimes felt lonely. She remembered the first time she had met him. It was a summer barbecue in their old neighborhood. Michael had just started his new job, excited and full of energy. He had introduced Daniel proudly as his closest friend from college, the one who had pushed him to chase bigger dreams. Daniel was quieter than Michael, with an easy smile and thoughtful eyes that seemed to notice more than he ever said that day. The air was thick with the smell of grilled food and the laughter of friends. Emily had spilled lemonade on her dress, and Daniel, quick to help, had handed her a napkin with a grin. "Well, that's one way to make an impression," he joked lightly. She had laughed then, not realizing that years later, it would be that same voice she'd remember in moments of silence. Over the years, Daniel became part of their lives in small but meaningful ways. He was there when Michael got his promotion, when they moved into their new house, when Emily's mother passed away and she couldn't stop crying for days. Daniel had shown up at her door then, carrying a small bouquet of lilies, her mother's favorite. "You don't have to talk," he'd said quietly. "Just sit. I'll stay a while." And he did. They sat in silence for hours, the sound of rain tapping gently on the windows. It was a kind of comfort that didn't need words, the kind that simply reminded her she wasn't alone. Now, years later, that same quiet understanding filled her memory as she thought about what he'd said yesterday. The truth, or perhaps the warning, had come from someone who had always meant well, someone who had always seen more than others noticed. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself tidying the living room, trying to keep her mind busy. She paused by the bookshelf, running her fingers over the spines of old photo albums. Pulling one out, she sat down and opened it across her lap. There they were, snapshots of her life frozen in time. Michael with his easy smile, his arm around her shoulders. Daniel beside them, laughing at something out of frame. There were birthdays, trips, and dinner nights that had once felt endless in one photo. Daniel was standing behind her, holding a sparkler during a 4th of July gathering. Emily remembered that night clearly. She had been worried because Michael had missed most of the evening, caught up in work calls. Daniel had noticed her sitting alone on the porch and joined her with 2 sparklers, saying, "You can't let the night end without at least one." The memory made her smile softly. Back then, she hadn't realized how much those small moments had meant, the ones filled with laughter that didn't feel forced. Conversations that flowed easily and silences that didn't feel empty. The doorbell rang again, bringing her back to the present. When she opened it, Daniel stood there once more. "Hey," he said, a little uncertainly. "I just wanted to check if you were okay after yesterday." I wasn't sure if I said too much. Emily shook her head gently. No, you were just being honest. I appreciate that. He nodded, relieved. Mind if I come in for a minute? They sat in the same spot as before, 2 cups of tea between them, the faint sound of wind outside. I've been thinking about what you said, Emily admitted. It's strange, remembering all the things we used to share and realizing how distant things have become. Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. It happens, Emily. Life pulls people apart without meaning to. It's not always about mistakes. Sometimes it's just time, work, pressure, and silence that grows where words used to be. She nodded slowly. You always seem to understand things better than you say. He smiled faintly. Maybe because I've watched both of you for years. You and Michael, you were always the example I looked up to. You balanced each other. You made everything seem simple. Emily's voice softened. It hasn't felt simple in a long time. The room fell quiet. The air carried an ache, neither of them named, but both felt. Not attraction, not longing, but the shared sadness of seeing something once beautiful begin to fade. You know, Daniel said after a while, I remember the day you two moved into this house. You were painting that wall over there? He pointed toward the living room corner. Michael picked that awful shade of blue, and you pretended to love it. Emily laughed for the first time in days, covering her face with her hands. I remember. It looked like the inside of a toy box. Exactly, Daniel said, smiling. But you laughed through it. That's what I remember about you, Emily. You always found light, even when things didn't turn out right. Her laughter faded into a thoughtful smile. Maybe I lost that part of myself somewhere. Then maybe it's time you find it again, Daniel said gently. For you, not for anyone else. For a long moment, they just sat there watching the rain roll down the window pane. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, almost healing. When Daniel finally stood to leave, he paused by the door. Whatever you decide, Emily, just make sure it's your truth. Don't let anyone else write it for you. After he left, Emily lingered by the window again, watching the raindrops trace the glass. She thought of the past, of laughter, of love, of all the things that had once made her world bright. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a quiet, stirring, not anger, not heartbreak, but something gentler. The faint hope that maybe, by facing the truth, she could find her light again. Days turned into a slow rhythm of routine for Emily. Mornings began with the soft hum of the kettle. Afternoons slipped by in quiet thought, and evenings brought shadows that stretched long across the living room floor. Yet beneath that calm surface, something inside her had begun to shift. Since Daniel's visit, a new awareness had grown in her heart. Not of him exactly, but of herself. Of what she had forgotten. It's been what she might still rediscover. Michael called a few times from Toronto, his voice distant and hurried. Sorry, Em, things are crazy here. I'll make it up to you when I'm back, he'd say, always with the same practiced tone. Emily would respond softly, It's okay. Just take care. But after each call ended, the silence in the house felt heavier. One Thursday afternoon, she decided to stop by the local market, a small place filled with familiar faces and warm chatter. The smell of baked bread and roasted coffee reminded her of simpler days. As she reached for a basket of apples, a voice behind her said, Still choosing the red ones, I see. Emily turned, surprised. There was Daniel holding a paper bag and smiling in that quiet way that made people feel seen. Daniel, she said, a genuine smile lighting her face for the first time that week. What are the odds? Small town, he replied. We were bound to run into each other eventually. They ended up walking together through the aisles, talking about nothing and everything. The weather, work, the rising price of coffee. It felt strangely easy, like slipping into a familiar rhythm she hadn't realized she'd missed. When they stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again, and Daniel offered to walk her home. It wasn't far, but she didn't refuse. There was comfort in his company, quiet, respectful, and steady. As they reached her porch, she paused. Would you like some coffee? She asked. I just bought a new blend. It's supposed to be good. He hesitated, then nodded. Sure, if you're sure it's no trouble. Inside, the house felt warmer with another presence. She set 2 mugs on the counter, and for a moment, the scene reminded her of long-ago days when the world had felt smaller, simpler. Daniel looked around, smiling faintly. You've kept everything almost the same since you moved in. Almost, she said quietly. A few things have changed. He tilted his head. Like what? Emily poured the coffee and handed him a mug. The silence, she said simply. It used to be peaceful. Now it just feels empty. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. You know, sometimes silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone to speak again. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time in what felt like years. There was no tension, no expectation, only understanding. They talked for hours that afternoon. About life, about change, about the strange ways people drift apart without meaning to. Daniel told her about his recent struggles at work, about how he'd been thinking of moving away for a while, maybe starting over somewhere new. You'd really leave? Emily asked quietly. He nodded slowly. Maybe. Some places stop feeling like home after a while. She stared down at her coffee, her heart tightening. I think I know what you mean. Outside, the rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the window. It was the same kind of rain that had fallen the day Daniel had first told her about Michael. Somehow, that felt like more than coincidence, like fate circling back, whispering that something still needed to be understood. After a while, Daniel stood. I should go before the roads get slippery, he said with a soft smile. Emily nodded. But something inside her urged her not to let the moment end like that. Wait, she said. Can I show you something? He paused at the door, curious. She walked to the bookshelf and pulled down the old photo album she had looked through days earlier. Sitting together on the couch, she opened it to the page with the picture of the 3 of them. Her, Michael, and Daniel laughing under the summer sun. You remember that day? She asked. He laughed softly. How could I forget? Michael nearly dropped the grill, trying to impress everyone. Emily smiled. We were all so happy back then. I didn't realize how fast things would change. Daniel's expression softened. Nothing stays the same forever. But that doesn't mean it's gone. She turned another page, this one showing a photo of just her and Michael their wedding day. For a moment, her eyes glistened. I used to believe love was something that stayed strong on its own. But now I think it's something you have to keep choosing even when it gets hard. Daniel looked at her gently. That's the truth. Emily, love isn't lost because it fades. It's lost when people stop fighting for it. Their eyes met again, and for a fleeting second, the air felt charged not with romance, but with honesty. 2 people standing at the edge of something they both understood, but would never cross. She closed the album and smiled faintly. Thank you for reminding me who I was. He shook his head. You never forgot. You just stopped looking. A quiet knock at the door startled them both. Emily opened it to find the mailman standing in the drizzle, holding a small envelope. She thanked him and closed the door, curious. The envelope was from Michael. Inside was a short note in his handwriting. I'm sorry for the distance. I've been thinking about us, about you. I'll be home soon. Please don't lose faith in me. Emily folded the letter carefully, her heart a mix of relief and uncertainty. Daniel watched her silently, reading her expression without asking questions. I guess fate likes its timing, she said softly. He gave a small nod. Maybe it just wanted to remind you that some truths arrive exactly when we need them. When Daniel left that evening, the house felt different, not as empty as before. Emily sat by the window, the letter still in her hand, and whispered to herself, maybe this time I'll see the truth clearly, all of it. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt the quiet not as loneliness, but as peace. The next few days drifted by in a haze of thought. The letter from Michael sat on the kitchen counter, unopened again, though Emily had already read it more than once. Every word lingered in her heart like an echo she couldn't quiet. He was coming home soon. She should have felt relief, She should have been happy that he wanted to talk, that maybe there was still hope to mend what had broken between them. But beneath that small flicker of hope, there was also something else, an ache she couldn't name, born not from anger or betrayal, but from everything that had gone unspoken for so long. That ache had grown sharper since Daniel's visit. She found herself thinking about him more often than she wanted to. Admit not in the way that threatened her vows, but in the way one remembers a friend who once helped them see clearly when the world felt dim. There was something about the steadiness of his voice, the honesty in his eyes, that made her feel seen again after years of being overlooked. Still, she knew that some truths were best left unspoken. On Sunday evening, as the light turned golden outside her window, Emily heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, holding a small box in his hands. "Hey," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to bother you. I was cleaning out my garage and found this. Thought you might want it?" She looked at the box curiously. "What is it?" He smiled faintly. "Your old recipe book, remember? The one you lent me after that disastrous Christmas dinner I hosted?" Emily laughed softly, the sound gentle and warm. "I can't believe you still had it." "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "I figured I'd return it before you thought I'd stolen your secret pie recipes." She stepped aside. "Come in. It's been a while since I made coffee for company." They sat in the living room again, the familiar hum of the clock filling the quiet between them. For a while, they spoke easily about the weather, about mutual friends, about everything safe and ordinary. But beneath every laugh, there was an unspoken tenderness neither of them dared to name. Finally, Daniel's voice softened. "You've been thinking a lot lately, haven't you?" Emily looked up, startled by how icily he saw through her. "You could say that." He leaned forward slightly. "About him?" She nodded. "And about myself." There was a pause. The air between them felt fragile, like a thread stretched thin. "I read his letter," she said finally. "He says he wants to make things right. But I don't know if I still remember how that's supposed to feel." Daniel's eyes were steady. "Maybe you don't have to remember. Maybe you just have to want it again." Emily's voice trembled a little. "I do want it, I think. But something inside me keeps holding back. It's like there's a part of me that's afraid to try, or afraid that if I open that door again, I'll just lose myself." Daniel was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You know, when Michael introduced me to you years ago, I thought, that's the kind of person who makes the world gentler just by being in it." She smiled faintly. "You always did know what to say." He shook his head. "Not really. I just mean it." Our eyes met. It wasn't the kind of gaze that sought anything more. It was one filled with understanding, a silent recognition of everything they couldn't say aloud. Emily looked away first, her fingers brushing the edge of the coffee mug. "Sometimes I wonder if honesty can be too heavy to carry." Daniel's voice was low, thoughtful. "Maybe, but silence can weigh even more." The clock ticked steadily in the background. Neither of them moved. The rain outside had returned, light and rhythmic, a quiet soundtrack to the tension that filled the room. "Daniel," she began softly, "tea." The morning Michael returned, the sky was painted with the pale light of early autumn. The air carried that quiet chill that seemed to whisper of change, the kind that crept in without warning. Touching everything it passed, Emily stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. She could hear the soft hum of a car pulling into the driveway, that sound she hadn't heard in months. For a moment, her heart raced, not with excitement or dread, but something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: uncertainty. When Michael stepped inside, there was a stillness between them. He looked older, more tired, but also somehow gentler. His eyes searched hers, and in that instant, she realized he'd been carrying his own kind of silence too. "Emily," he said quietly, "you look different." She smiled faintly. "I feel different." He placed his suitcase down, hesitating before taking another step closer. "Can we talk? I don't even know where to start." "Maybe from the truth." she said softly. Wherever that begins. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where they had once shared laughter, long talks, and years of dreams. The same table that had stood silently through arguments and quiet dinners where no one spoke. Michael sighed. I know I let things slip away. The distance between us. I thought if I worked harder, I'd fix everything. But all I did was disappear from my own home. Emily didn't interrupt. She listened, truly listened for the first time in a long while. He continued, his voice lower now. When I left for the city, I told myself it was temporary, that I was doing it for us. But somewhere along the way, I started doing it for me, for the noise, the distraction. I didn't know how to face how quiet things had become here, how quiet we had become. Emily's eyes filled with unshed tears. You weren't the only one hiding, Michael. I kept busy too, with routines, with chores, with pretending that everything was fine. But the truth is, I didn't know how to reach you anymore. He nodded slowly. And now? Now, she said, taking a shaky breath. I'm not sure I know how to find us again. But I want to understand what we've lost and why. There was a pause, heavy but alive. The silence wasn't a wall anymore. It was a space where truth could breathe. Michael's eyes softened. I heard Daniel came by a few times. Emily blinked, surprised by the sudden mention. He did. He helped me fix a few things around the house, and... Michael asked gently. She met his gaze. And he reminded me what honesty sounds like. He didn't tell me what to feel, Michael. He just listened and asked me to be honest with myself. Michael nodded slowly. He's a good man, as she said quietly. He is. For a moment, neither spoke. The air seemed thick with everything that had been left unsaid for years. Then, slowly, Michael reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly. Emily, have I lost you? The question broke something inside her. Not out of guilt, but out of the sheer weight of truth. She looked down at his hand, then back into his eyes. No, she said softly, but you almost did. Michael's shoulders sagged with relief and grief. I deserve that. Emily took a breath, her voice steady now. You deserve honesty. We both do. For the first time, they spoke freely about the small misunderstandings that had grown into walls. About the love that had quietly turned into habit. About the loneliness neither had dared to admit. Every word felt like a release. Not easy. Not comfortable, but real. As the sun climbed higher, Michael leaned back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. You know, he said softly, I used to tell my coworkers I had the perfect marriage. Not because it was true, but because I wanted it to be. Emily smiled sadly. And I used to tell my friends I wasn't lonely, because I didn't want it to be true. They both laughed, then a broken, tender laugh that carried both pain and healing. When the laughter faded, Emily said, we can't go back to what we were. But maybe we can start again as to people who actually see each other this time. Michael nodded, his voice rough. I'd like that, even if it takes time. She smiled, faint but genuine. It will, but maybe time isn't the enemy. Maybe it's what we needed. The doorbell rang suddenly, breaking the quiet. Emily froze, a flash of recognition crossing her face. Daniel. He had said he might stop by before leaving town. Michael gave her a knowing look. It's okay, he said softly. Go ahead. Emily walked to the door, heart pounding. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, holding a small envelope. I wanted to say goodbye, he said. I'm leaving tonight. She nodded, her throat tight. Thank you for everything, Daniel. For listening. For reminding me of things I'd forgotten. He smiled gently. You already had everything you needed. Emily, you just stopped believing in it. Michael appeared behind her, and for a brief moment, all three stood there. Past mistakes, present truths, an unspoken gratitude woven between them. Daniel extended his hand toward Michael. Take care of her. She's stronger than she knows, but she still deserves to be cherished. Michael shook his hand firmly. I intend to. As Daniel turned to leave, the air felt lighter, though bittersweet. Emily watched him walk down the path until he disappeared from sight. Then she turned to Michael, who stood quietly, waiting. "Are you ready to try?" he asked. She took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, not because we owe it to the past, but because maybe the future still deserves a chance. Michael smiled, a small, humble smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. And as the evening sun filtered through the window, touching the room in gold, Emily felt something stir within her. Not perfection, not certainty, but peace. The truth had been spoken, finally, and though it hurt, it had also set her free. The house felt different that evening. Not louder, not brighter, but lighter, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath for months and were finally exhaling. Emily sat by the window, the last light of the day spilling across the living room floor, and listened to the gentle hush of the neighborhood. Somewhere, far down the street, children laughed in the fading warmth of autumn. Michael was in the kitchen, unpacking a small bag he had brought back from the city. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was calm, patient, like two people learning how to exist together again without rushing. Finally, Michael turned and leaned against the counter, watching her. "Emily, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about choosing ourselves first so we can love honestly." She smiled softly. "It's not always easy, but it's true." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "I don't want to waste another day pretending things are perfect when they aren't. I want to start over slowly, carefully, but together." Emily's heart lifted. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard for a long time. Sincerity. Not the hurried promises of someone busy, distracted, or lost in his own world. Sincere words that matched his eyes, his expression, and his presence. "I'd like that too," she said, her voice steady. "Not because we have to, but because we want to." He smiled, and it was small, shy almost, like a man rediscovering a path he had once walked confidently but had forgotten. "I missed this us talking honestly. I didn't realize how much I'd taken it for granted." Emily set her cup down and leaned back, letting herself feel the weight lift from her chest. For months, she had carried questions she hadn't dared to speak aloud. Now, those questions were met with answers, not excuses. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, scattering golden leaves across the yard. She could hear the faint sound of a neighbor's dog barking and the soft echo of distant footsteps. Life had moved forward even while she had been standing still. And now, standing together, she felt ready to move too. "I know it won't be easy," Emily said quietly. "There will be days when we stumble, when the silence creeps in again. But at least we'll face it together." Michael reached for her hand across the table, holding it with a gentleness that spoke volumes. "We will, and we'll remember how far we've come, how much we've survived to be here now." She squeezed his hand, letting herself trust in the promise of his words. "We've both grown, Michael. And maybe that's exactly what we needed to come back to each other. Distance, mistakes, and the quiet lessons in between." He smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and hope. "Maybe so. And maybe some truths are worth facing, no matter how long it takes." The doorbell rang softly, and Emily rose to answer. Outside stood Daniel, holding a small envelope and a gentle smile. "I didn't want to leave without saying goodbye," he said. "I'm heading out of town tonight." Emily felt a lump in her throat. She handed him the recipe book he had returned days before. Now with little notes she had added to remind him of her favorite dishes. "Thank you for everything," she said. "For reminding me of who I am and for helping me see what matters." Daniel smiled warmly, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "You didn't need me to show you. You just needed to believe it yourself. I'm glad you did." Michael stepped forward, offering a polite nod. "Thank you, Daniel, for your honesty and for helping Emily see clearly." Daniel's smile softened. "Take care of each other. That's all I ever hoped for." With that, he turned and walked down the path, disappearing from sight. Emily closed the door slowly, feeling the air around her shift. The farewell wasn't sad. It was the gentle reminder that sometimes people come into our lives not to stay, but to help us find what we've lost. Turning back to Michael, she found him waiting patiently. Are we ready to try? He asked his voyek.